"You don't belong here anymore, sweetie. This is my house now." Those were the words Tiffany spat at Sarah in front of 50 wealthy guests, swirling her glass of vintage champagne with a smirk that could cut glass. She thought she had won. She thought stealing the husband meant she stole the empire. She thought the quiet woman in the corner was nobody. But she forgot one thing. In the world of old money, the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the least power. Stay tuned, because what happens when the father-in-law finally stands up isn't just a twist. It's a total destruction of a gold digger's ego. You won't believe who actually signed the deed to the mansion. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and textured like linen, the kind of stationery that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Sarah Jenkins held it in her trembling hands, staring at the calligraphy. Mr. Arthur Harrington's 75th Jubilee. The Harrington Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. It had been 6 months since Sarah had set foot on that property. 6 months since her husband, David Harrington, had sat her down in their modest breakfast nook and told her he needed space. That space, it turned out, was a 24-year-old Instagram fitness model named Tiffany Blair. Sarah wasn't naive. She knew marriages had rough patches. She and David had been together for 12 years, married for 10. She had nursed him through his failed tech startup in 2018. She had managed the family's public relations during the scandal with Uncle Jerry. She had been the rock. But apparently, rocks are boring, and Tiffany was a shiny new diamond. "Why go?" her best friend Jessica had asked over the phone earlier that morning. "Sarah, he served you divorce papers 3 weeks ago. It's humiliating." Sarah smoothed the skirt of her dress, a vintage emerald green velvet that she had found in a consignment shop in Paris years ago. It wasn't new, but it was timeless. "Arthur asked me to come," Sarah said, her voice steady but quiet. "He called me personally. He said the family isn't whole without me." "David is bringing her," Jessica warned. "You know that, right? The mistress, the home wrecker. She's going to be there, draped all over him, playing the lady of the manor." "I know," Sarah whispered. She looked in the mirror. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a woman who had weathered a storm. Her auburn hair was pinned back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry except for a simple pearl necklace Arthur had given her 5 years ago for Christmas. No wedding ring. She had taken that off the day David moved Tiffany into his downtown penthouse. The drive from her small, rented apartment to the Greenwich estate took 40 minutes. It was a rainy October evening, the leaves slick on the winding roads. As she approached the massive iron gates of the Harrington estate, her stomach tightened. This place had been her home. She knew the gate code, 1984, David's birth year. But as she pulled her modest Honda Civic up to the keypad, the code didn't work. She tried again. 1984. Nothing. Red light. A sleek black security guard stepped out of the booth. It was old Miller, a man Sarah had brought coffee to on freezing winter mornings for a decade. He looked pained. "Mrs. Harrington," Miller started, then corrected himself, looking down at his clipboard. "Miss Jenkins, I'm so sorry." "The code changed, Miller?" Sarah asked, rolling down the window. The rain misted her face. "Mr. David had it changed yesterday," Miller said, his voice low, as if he were sharing a state secret. "He said strictly family and approved guests only. Your name is on the list, but the code—" "I understand," she said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Can you buzz me in?" Miller hesitated. "Ms. Jenkins, I was told to hold you here until Mr. David or Ms. Blair approved the entry. New protocol." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Approved the entry?" She had planned the landscaping of this driveway. She had picked out the hydrangeas lining the fence. "Call him," Sarah said, her voice hardening. Miller picked up the phone. Sarah watched through the rain-streaked glass. She saw Miller nodding, looking uncomfortable. A moment later, a massive white G-Wagon pulled up behind Sarah's Honda, honking aggressively. The headlights were blinding in her rearview mirror. Miller hung up and rushed to the window. "I have to let the car behind you in first, Ms. Jenkins. Mr. David's orders." Sarah gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She had to reverse her car onto the muddy shoulder to let the G-Wagon pass. As the massive SUV rolled by, the passenger window slid down. There she was, Tiffany Blair. She was wearing white, a floor-length, backless white gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress. Her blonde hair was in perfect, voluminous waves. She lowered her designer sunglasses, looking at Sarah's Honda in the mud with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Oops," Tiffany called out, her voice shrill and mocking. "Sorry about the mud, sweetie. Some cars just aren't built for this tax bracket." David was driving. He didn't even look at Sarah. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, refusing to make eye contact with the woman who had washed his clothes and paid his bills for a decade. The gate opened for them. The G-Wagon roared through. Sarah sat in the mud for 3 full minutes before Miller buzzed the gate open. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Miller whispered as she finally drove through. "Arthur doesn't know about the new rules. I swear." "It's okay, Miller," she said. But it wasn't okay. The war had started, and Tiffany had just fired the first shot. The Harrington mansion was a sprawling Georgian estate, illuminated tonight by floodlights that turned the stone facade into a golden fortress. Valets in red vests were sprinting back and forth, parking Bentleys, Porsches, and Aston Martins. When Sarah pulled up in her Honda, the young valet, a new kid she didn't recognize, looked confused. "Deliveries are around the back, Mom," he said, waving her away. Sarah put the car in park and stepped out, the heels of her shoes clicking on the cobblestone. She handed him the keys. "I'm a guest. Name is Jenkins." The valet flushed pink. "Oh, my apologies. It's just the car." "Keep it close," she said coolly. "I won't be staying late." She walked up the grand staircase. The heavy oak doors were open, spilling warm light, and the sound of a string quartet into the night air. Inside, the foyer was packed. The elite of Connecticut society were here. Senators, hedge fund managers, old money dynasties that dated back to the Mayflower. Sarah took a deep breath, head high, shoulders back. "You are Sarah Jenkins." She entered the room. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. People who knew her, people who had come to her dinner parties for years, averted their eyes. It was the social death sentence. If they talked to the rejected wife, they might offend the new favorite. However, across the room, she saw Arthur Harrington, the patriarch. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the fireplace, a plaid blanket over his knees. He looked frail, much frailer than the last time she saw him. His eyes were closed. Sarah began to move toward him, but her path was blocked. Tiffany Blair materialized in front of her, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Up close, the white dress was even more aggressive. It was pure silk, clinging to every curve, shouting for attention. On her finger, a massive canary-yellow diamond ring glittered, a ring Sarah recognized. It was David's grandmother's ring, the one Sarah had worn for 10 years. David stood a few feet behind Tiffany, looking like a lost puppy in a tuxedo. "You actually came," Tiffany said, her voice loud enough to silence the nearby conversation circle. "David, I told you she has no shame." Sarah looked Tiffany up and down, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Tiffany. David. I'm here to wish Arthur a happy birthday." Arthur is tired, Tiffany snapped, stepping closer, invading Sarah's personal space. He doesn't need his ex-daughter-in-law stressing him out with her gloomy energy. I'm not his ex-daughter-in-law yet, Sarah said calmly. The papers aren't signed. Tiffany let out a high-pitched, cruel laugh. She turned to the group of women standing nearby, wives of David's business partners. Can you believe this? She's hanging on by a thread. It's sad, really, like a barnacle on a yacht. The women tittered nervously. David, Sarah said, looking past Tiffany to her husband. Can we speak? David rubbed the back of his neck. Sarah, please, don't make a scene. Tiffany has been planning this party for weeks. She's the hostess. You need to respect that. Hostess? Sarah raised an eyebrow. This is Arthur's house. Not for long, Tiffany interjected, linking her arm through David's. Arthur is moving to assisted living next month. We're taking over the estate. Renovations start Monday. I'm thinking of gutting this foyer. It smells like old people. And desperation. She looked pointedly at Sarah's vintage dress. By the way, is that the same dress you wore to the Christmas party 3 years ago? Or did you just pick it up at Goodwill? The room went silent. The insult was so crass, so lacking in the subtle shade of high society, that it was shocking. Sarah didn't flinch. She smiled, a small, dangerous smile. It's vintage Dior, Tiffany, 1954, but I wouldn't expect you to know that. Fast fashion doesn't usually come with history books. Tiffany's eyes narrowed into slits. The air crackled with tension. You need to leave, Tiffany hissed. You are ruining the vibe. I was invited, Sarah repeated, by a senile old man who doesn't know what day it is, Tiffany shouted. Is that so? The voice boomed from the fireplace. The crowd parted. Arthur Harrington's eyes were open. He wasn't asleep. He had been listening. He tapped his cane against the floor, signaling his nurse to wheel him over. The room held its breath. Arthur was known for 2 things: his ruthlessness in business and his terrifying temper. Tiffany immediately changed her demeanor. She beamed, a fake plastic smile plastered on her face. Daddy Arthur, look who crashed the party. I was just telling Sarah that she should probably go, so you can rest. Arthur ignored Tiffany completely. He rolled his wheelchair until he was right in front of Sarah. He looked up at her, his blue eyes watery but sharp as a tack. He reached out a shaking hand. Sarah took it. His skin was paper thin. Sarah, he rasped. Happy birthday, Arthur, she said softly, ignoring the burning stares of the room. You're late, Arthur grumbled, but there was a twinkle in his eye. I got held up at the gate, Sarah said, casting a glance at David. Technical difficulties? Arthur's gaze shifted to his son. David. Why was my daughter-in-law held at the gate? David paled. Dad, we just updated the security, for your safety. Sarah doesn't live here anymore, so... She doesn't live here, Tiffany piped up, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. Arthur flinched at her touch. And honestly, Arthur, it's awkward for everyone. We're trying to move forward. The past is the past. Arthur looked at Tiffany's hand on his shoulder as if it were a venomous spider. He slowly lifted his cane and knocked her hand away. Don't touch the suit, Tiffany. It costs more than your education, Arthur muttered. A few guests stifled laughs. Tiffany's face turned bright red. Dinner is served, the banquet manager announced loudly, sensing the impending explosion. Come, Sarah, Arthur said, gripping her hand tighter. You sit next to me. Actually, Daddy Arthur, Tiffany said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. The seating chart is done. I put Sarah at table 9. It's near the kitchen. It's better for her. She'll feel more comfortable with the staff. Table 1 was the head table. Table 9 was the overflow table for the photographers and the band's assistants. It was a deliberate public demotion. Sarah felt the humiliation burn her cheeks. To sit at the kids' table at a party she used to host. "I'll sit where I'm told," Sarah said to Arthur, patting his hand. "It's your night. I won't cause trouble." She walked away toward the back of the room, head held high, while Tiffany smirked at her back. David leaned in to whisper to Tiffany. "You went too far with the table." "Shut up, David," Tiffany hissed. "I'm marking my territory. Watch. By the end of the night, she'll be crying in her Honda, and this house will be ours." But as Sarah took her seat next to a confused saxophone player at Table 9, she noticed something. Arthur was staring at her from across the room, and he wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her like a general who was waiting for the signal to open fire. The first course was a lobster bisque, poured from silver tureens by waiters who moved with the synchronized grace of ballet dancers. At Table 9, however, the service was slower. Sarah sat between the saxophone player, whose name was Leo, and a frantic freelance photographer named Greg, who was trying to change his camera lens without dropping it into the butter dish. "So," Leo whispered, adjusting his bow tie, "you're the ex?" Sarah unfolded her napkin. "Paper, not linen like the head table." "Not yet, Leo. Legally, I'm still the wife. But tonight, I'm apparently the ghost." From her vantage point near the swinging kitchen doors, Sarah had a direct line of sight to the head table. It was a display of excess. The centerpiece was a sprawling arrangement of white orchids and ostrich feathers that blocked the view of anyone sitting opposite. Tiffany sat at Arthur's right hand, a seat Sarah had occupied for 10 years, and she was holding court. Sarah watched as Tiffany snapped her fingers at a waiter. "Excuse me, this bisque is lukewarm. Take it back, and tell the chef that if the filet mignon is this cold, he can pack his knives." The waiter, a man Sarah knew named Thomas, looked mortified. "I'm sorry, Ms. Blair. I'll replace it immediately." "She's charming," Leo muttered, following Sarah's gaze. "She's nervous," Sarah observed, taking a sip of the table water. "She's trying to assert dominance because she feels like an imposter, but she's overplaying her hand." The dinner dragged on. The room was filled with the low hum of gossip. Sarah could feel eyes darting toward her table. She saw Aunt Beatrice, a woman Sarah had driven to chemotherapy appointments for 6 months, whisper something to David's cousin, then glance at Sarah and giggle behind a diamond-encrusted hand. The betrayal stung more than the demotion to the staff table. These were people she had considered family. Halfway through the main course, Tiffany stood up. She tapped her spoon against her champagne glass. The sharp ting-ting-ting silenced the room. "Attention, everyone," Tiffany announced, her voice slightly slurred. She had finished 3 glasses of wine since the salad course. "I just want to say a few words for Daddy Arthur." David looked up from his plate, looking pained. He tugged at her dress. "Tiff, sit down. Dad hates speeches during the meal." "Hush, babe." She swatted him away. She raised her glass. "To Arthur, for turning 75. That is, wow, so old. But seriously, looking at this house, I realize how much work keeps you young. And speaking of work," she paused for dramatic effect, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "David and I have a surprise announcement. Since Arthur is going to be moving to the facility next month, we have decided to breathe new life into the Harrington estate. We've hired the best architect in New York. We're going to knock down the East Wing. Sorry, Arthur, but that library is a dust trap, and put in a state-of-the-art spa and a glass-walled garage for David's collection." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. The library was Arthur's sanctuary. It held first editions collected by his grandfather. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. She's gutting the legacy, she thought. She's erasing the history, Tiffany continued, oblivious to the icy atmosphere. It's going to be called the Blair Harrington Wing. Out with the old, in with the new. So let's drink to the future. A future that is young, hot, and rich. Hear, hear, a few of David's frat boy business partners shouted from table 3. The rest of the room was awkwardly silent. Arthur did not raise his glass. He sat stone-faced, staring at his untouched steak. Tiffany sat down, looking triumphant. She leaned over to Arthur and whispered something loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Don't look so grumpy, old man. You won't even remember the library in a few weeks. Dementia is a blessing in disguise, right? That was it. Sarah stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Leo looked up, alarmed. Sarah, don't. She's baiting you. I know, Sarah said, picking up her clutch. But I need air. If I stay here, I'm going to throw a bread roll at her head. Sarah walked toward the French doors leading to the terrace. As she passed the head table, Tiffany spotted her. Leaving so soon, Sarah, Tiffany called out. We haven't even cut the cake. I made sure they saved you a slice. Although, looking at that dress, maybe you're watching your carbs. Sarah stopped. She turned slowly. The room went silent again. This was the confrontation everyone had been waiting for. Enjoy the renovation, Tiffany, Sarah said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the room. But be careful with the east wing. The foundation is tricky. If you dig too deep without understanding what holds this house together, the whole thing collapses on top of you. Tiffany laughed. Is that a threat? It's architectural advice, Sarah said. Something you can't buy on Instagram. She walked out onto the terrace, the cold night air hitting her flushed face. She walked to the stone railing and looked out over the gardens she had tended for years. She was shaking. That was handled with grace, a deep voice said from the shadows. Sarah jumped. It was Miller, the security guard who had been forced to stop her at the gate. He was on patrol. I lost my temper, Miller, she sighed. No, ma'am. You stood your ground, Miller said. He stepped closer, checking to make sure no one was listening. Mr. Arthur. He sees everything. You know that, right? He's been meeting with his lawyers a lot lately. Mr. Sterling. You remember him? Arthur's estate attorney. Sarah frowned. I thought Sterling retired. He came back, Miller said ominously. For this week. Just hold on, Mrs. Harrington. The night isn't over. Sarah looked back through the glass doors. Inside, servants were clearing the plates. A table was being wheeled into the center of the room. It was time for the presentation of gifts. This was a Harrington tradition, a display of wealth and affection that usually resulted in Arthur receiving things he didn't need, like humidors or antique globes. I have to go back in, Sarah said, steeling herself. I have something for him. Good luck, Miller whispered. When Sarah re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted from awkward to expectant. The guests had shifted their chairs to face the center of the room, where Arthur sat like a king on a throne, looking increasingly bored. David was up first. He walked to the center of the room, holding a small velvet box. Happy birthday, Dad, David said, handing over the box. Arthur opened it. It was a key. A key, Arthur asked dryly. To a 1965 Shelby Cobra, David beamed, pointing out the window where a blue sports car was now parked under the floodlights. I know you've always wanted one. I can't drive, David, Arthur said flatly. My legs don't work. The room stifled a collective gasp. David turned red. Well, I can drive you in it. It's an investment. It's for the family garage. You mean the garage you're building for yourself? Arthur snapped the box shut. Thank you, David. Put it with the other toys. David retreated, humiliated, shooting a glare at Tiffany. It had clearly been her idea. "My turn," Tiffany squealed, bouncing up. She signaled to two waiters who carried in a massive object covered in a gold tarp. "Daddy Arthur," she cooed into the microphone, "I know you love art, and I wanted to give you something that immortalizes this new chapter of the Harrington legacy." She whipped the tarp off. It was a painting, a massive, 6-foot-tall oil painting. It depicted the Harrington mansion, but stylized. The colors were bright, almost neon, and standing on the front lawn in the painting were David and Tiffany. David looked heroic in a suit. Tiffany looked like a goddess in a white dress, and in the background, in the shadows of an upstairs window, was a faint, grey figure. It looked like a ghost. It was clearly meant to be Arthur. "It's titled The Succession," Tiffany announced proudly. "I commissioned it from a Soho artist. It's going to hang right over the fireplace in the foyer." Arthur stared at the painting. He stared at the depiction of himself as a fading ghost in his own home. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so hard his knuckles turned white. "It's certainly something," Arthur rasped. "To think I survived the market crash of '87 only to be defeated by neon paint." "I knew you'd love it," Tiffany clapped. "We're hanging it tomorrow." Finally, the room quieted down. There was one gift left. Sarah stepped forward. She was carrying nothing but a small, leather-bound book. It was worn, the edges frayed. Tiffany snorted into her champagne glass. "What is that? A diary?" "Dear Diary, today I lost my husband." Sarah ignored her. She walked up to Arthur and knelt beside his wheelchair so she was at eye level. She didn't use the microphone. "Arthur," she said softly, "I didn't buy you a car, and I didn't commission a painting." She placed the book in his lap. Arthur looked down. His breath hitched. "Is this—" "I found it in the attic 3 years ago," Sarah explained. "It was water damaged from the leak in the roof. The pages were stuck together. The ink was fading. I spent the last 6 months working with a restoration expert in London. We managed to save almost all of it." Arthur opened the book with trembling fingers. It was a photo album, but not just any album. It was the wedding album of Arthur and his late wife, Eleanor. Eleanor had died 20 years ago. The original album had been lost for a decade. Arthur turned the page. There was a black and white photo of him and Eleanor, young and laughing, cutting their cake. He turned another page. Eleanor holding baby David. Another. Eleanor and Arthur standing in front of the mansion when they first bought it, before the fortune, when they were just happy. A single tear rolled down Arthur's cheek. The room was deadly silent. The emotional weight of the gift was crushing compared to the superficial displays from David and Tiffany. "Eleanor," Arthur whispered, "I thought I'd never see these again." "She's always here, Arthur," Sarah said, placing her hand on his. "This house is her. It's you. No renovation can change that." Arthur looked at Sarah with a look of pure love and gratitude. "Thank you, my dear. This is the best gift I have ever received." The guests began to applaud. It was genuine applause, warm and emotional. Even Aunt Beatrice was dabbing her eyes. Tiffany couldn't stand it. She wasn't the center of attention. She wasn't the beloved daughter-in-law. She was the outsider with the neon painting. She marched over, her heels clicking aggressively. "Oh, how sweet," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "A dusty old book. Let me see." "Tiffany, don't," David warned, sensing the danger. "I just want to see," she snapped. She reached for the album in Arthur's lap. "Don't touch it," Arthur growled, pulling it away. "Oh, come on, Arthur, don't be a baby," Tiffany said, lunging for it. In the scuffle, her arm flailed. She was holding a full glass of red Cabernet. As she grabbed for the book, her other hand jerked forward. Splash! The entire glass of dark red wine cascaded over the open album in Arthur's lap. It soaked the restored pages. It pooled on the photo of Eleanor. It dripped onto Arthur's plaid blanket. The room gasped, a collective, horrified intake of breath. Sarah froze. She watched the red liquid seep into the paper she had spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours restoring. Tiffany stood back, her hand over her mouth. But her eyes weren't apologetic. They were panicked, but there was a flicker of satisfaction. "Oops," she said. "He shouldn't have pulled it away. It's his fault." Arthur stared down at the ruined image of his dead wife. The red wine looked like blood across her face. He began to shake. A low, guttural sound came from his throat. Sarah didn't think. She stood up, turned to Tiffany, and for the first time in her life, she let the rage take over. "You poisonous, selfish child," Sarah said, her voice low and terrifying. "It was an accident," Tiffany shrieked, playing the victim. "David! She's yelling at me!" David rushed forward. "Sarah, calm down. It's just a book. We can buy another one." "Buy another one?" Sarah spun on David. "It was his wedding album, you idiot. It was the only copy. You can't buy memories, David. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You traded your memories for a plastic trophy wife who destroys everything she touches." "Don't talk about her like that," David shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Get your hands off her," Arthur roared. The power in the old man's voice was shocking. He slammed his cane onto the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Arthur looked up, his face purple with rage. He looked at the ruined book, then at Tiffany, then at David. "Enough," Arthur said. He wasn't rasping anymore. His voice was cold steel. "Miller!" The security guard stepped out from the shadows instantly. "Yes, sir." "Get Mr. Sterling on the phone," Arthur commanded, "and bring him here, now." "Dad, Sterling is in the city," David stammered. "It's 9 p.m. What do you need a lawyer for?" Arthur looked at his son with eyes that were completely devoid of warmth. "I need a lawyer," Arthur said, "because I am about to make an announcement, and I want it notarized." He pointed a shaking finger at Tiffany. "You wanted to talk about the future of this house. You wanted to talk about who owns what." Tiffany took a step back, suddenly terrified. "Let's talk," Arthur said. "Bring the microphone." The silence in the grand ballroom was heavy, pressing down on the guests like a physical weight. The only sound was the rhythmic dripping of red wine from the edge of the velvet tablecloth onto the parquet floor, a steady drip, drip, drip that sounded like a ticking clock counting down to an explosion. Arthur Harrington sat motionless in his wheelchair, his eyes fixed on the ruined wedding album. He wasn't looking at Tiffany or David anymore. He was looking inward, mourning the desecration of the last tangible piece of his history with Eleanor. When he finally looked up, his expression had hardened into something granite-like, impenetrable and cold. "Miller," Arthur said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Is he here?" Miller, the loyal security guard who had stood by the door, nodded. He pressed a finger to his earpiece. "He just pulled up, sir. He's coming through the north entrance." "Who is coming?" David demanded, stepping forward, trying to regain control of the room. He smoothed his suit jacket, though his hands were shaking. "Dad, stop this theatrics. The party is over. You're tired. You're clearly having an episode. Tiffany didn't mean to spill the wine. It was an accident. We'll get the book cleaned." "Cleaned?" Arthur let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "You think you can just clean things away, David? You think you can wipe away a decade of loyalty from your wife like a stain?" You think you can wipe away my legacy with a coat of neon paint?" Before David could answer, the double doors at the side of the room swung open. The man who entered was not a party guest. He was dressed in a charcoal grey suit that looked sharp enough to draw blood. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore wire-rimmed glasses. It was Harrison Sterling, the most feared estate attorney in Connecticut, a man known as the Vulture, because when he showed up, it usually meant someone's financial carcass was being picked clean. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. "That's Sterling. He hasn't been seen in public since the Rockefeller merger. What is he doing here on a Saturday night? Oh, this is bad. This is very bad for David." Tiffany, sensing the shift in power but too arrogant to understand the danger, tried to intercept him. She stepped into Sterling's path, flashing her teeth. "Excuse me? This is a private event. Unless you're the magician for the entertainment, you need to leave." Sterling stopped. He looked down at Tiffany over the rim of his glasses with the same disinterest one might show a buzzing fly. He didn't say a word to her. He simply stepped around her as if she were a piece of furniture and walked straight to Arthur. "Mr. Harrington," Sterling said, placing the briefcase on a side table. "I have the documents prepared as per our discussion on Tuesday." "Tuesday?" David's eyes widened. "Dad, you met with Sterling on Tuesday. You told me you were at the cardiologist." "I was checking on the condition of my heart." "Yes," Arthur said, staring at his son. "And I realized it was breaking. So I decided to fix it." Arthur gestured for Sterling to open the briefcase. The click of the latches echoed in the silent room. Sterling pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in blue legal covers. "David, Tiffany," Arthur said, pointing to 2 chairs in the center of the room, directly in front of the crowd. "Sit." "I will not," Tiffany scoffed. "This is ridiculous. I'm the hostess. I have guests to attend to." "Sit down!" Arthur roared. The volume was so sudden that Tiffany actually jumped. She looked at David for support, but David was already sinking into one of the chairs, looking pale and sweaty. Reluctantly, Tiffany sat next to him, crossing her arms and pouting like a petulant child. Sarah stood off to the side, near table 9. She felt a hand on her elbow. It was Leo, the saxophone player. "You might want to get closer," he whispered. "I think the good part is starting." Sarah moved slowly toward the front, standing near Arthur's wheelchair. Arthur looked up at her and gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. "Watch this," his eyes seemed to say. "For the past 6 months," Arthur began, addressing the room as if he were holding a board meeting, I have watched my son throw away a brilliant, supportive woman for a passing fancy. I have watched him neglect his duties to this company, and tonight I watched him and his mistress disrespect my home, my staff, and the memory of my late wife." "Dad, please," David whispered, his voice cracking. "Not in front of everyone." "You humiliated Sarah in front of everyone," Arthur countered. "You made her sit by the kitchen. You made her beg to enter the gate. Public disrespect requires a public correction." Arthur turned to Sterling. "Read the first clause regarding the estate transfer." Sterling cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses and picked up the first document. As of October 1st of this year, the property known as the Harrington Estate, located at 12 Oak Lane, was subject to a trigger event clause within the Harrington Family Trust. Tiffany yawned loudly. "Boring. Can we skip to the part where we get our presents?" Sterling ignored her. The trigger event was defined as the filing of divorce papers by the primary beneficiary, David Harrington, against the secondary beneficiary, Sarah Jenkins, without cause of infidelity or abuse. David frowned. "What? I never saw that clause." You never read the trust, David, Arthur said calmly. You just spent the dividends. Sterling continued. Upon the activation of this trigger, the ownership of the Harrington estate does not pass to the primary beneficiary. Tiffany froze. The smirk dropped from her face. Wait, what does that mean? Who owns the house? Let me finish, Sterling said sharply. He flipped a page. Furthermore, the trust stipulates that all assets, including the mansion, the grounds, the vintage car collection, and the family art holdings, revert immediately to the grantor, Arthur Harrington, with the sole power to redistribute via a living deed. So you own it, David let out a sigh of relief. Okay, Dad, you own it. Fine, we get it. You're the boss. We can still live here, right? We're still doing the renovations? Arthur looked at David with profound pity. You still don't understand, do you? You think this is a negotiation? This is an eviction? Arthur motioned to Sterling again. The deed, Harrison. Sterling picked up a single sheet of heavy, bonded paper. Mr. Harrington has executed a quitclaim deed this evening, transferring the entirety of the Harrington estate, free and clear, to a new owner. This transfer is effective immediately. The timestamp on the notary seal is 8:45 p.m., 20 minutes ago. Who? Tiffany shrieked, standing up. Who did you give our house to? The charity for stray cats? The nursing home? Arthur smiled. It was a wolf's smile. I gave it, Arthur said, to the only person who knows which hydrangeas grow in the shade, the only person who knows how to fix the boiler when it rattles, the only person who respected Eleanor's memory. He turned his head slowly and looked at Sarah. Ms. Jenkins, Sterling announced, his voice booming. Congratulations. You are the sole owner of the Harrington estate. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, and the sound of glass breaking as someone dropped a drink. Sarah stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. Arthur, no, I can't. It's millions of dollars. It's your home, Sarah, Arthur said softly. It always was. You were the one who made it a home. David just treated it like a hotel. David jumped up, knocking his chair over. This is insane. You can't do this. She's my ex-wife. She's a nobody. She is the owner of the house you are standing in, Sterling corrected him legally. And according to the law, she has the right to determine who is allowed on the premises. Tiffany was hyperventilating. She looked around the foyer, the grand staircase she planned to descend for her wedding photos, the walls she wanted to paint, the status she thought she had secured. It was slipping through her fingers like sand. You senile old bat, Tiffany screamed, lunging toward Arthur. You can't give my house to her. She drives a Honda. Miller stepped forward, blocking Tiffany with his massive frame. Step back, Miss Blair. David, do something. Tiffany grabbed David's lapels and shook him. He's stealing our future. Dad, you have to undo this, David pleaded, sweat pouring down his face. Please, think about the family. Think about the Harrington name. I am thinking about the name, Arthur said. That's why I'm taking it away from you. Arthur leaned back in his chair, looking tired but satisfied. Sarah, my dear. Sarah stepped forward. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp realization of the power she now held. She looked at the deed Sterling was holding out to her. She looked at the guests who had shunned her. She looked at the husband who had betrayed her. And she looked at the mistress who had bullied her. She took the paper. Yes, Arthur, she asked. It's your house, Arthur said. What would you like to do with the trespassers? Sarah Jenkins held the deed in her hand. It felt light, but the weight of it shifted the entire gravitational pull of the room. She turned to face David and Tiffany. For the first time all night, Tiffany didn't have a snappy comeback. She looked small. Her white dress, which had seemed so domineering an hour ago, now looked like a costume. "Sarah," David started, putting on his best, charming salesman voice. He took a step toward her. "Look, obviously emotions are high. Dad is... well, he's having a moment. But you and I, we have history. We can work this out. I mean, you don't really want a place this big, right? The taxes alone are a nightmare. Maybe we can come to an arrangement. I can buy you out, or we can share." Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the lines of worry around his eyes, the desperation in his posture. She realized suddenly that she didn't love him anymore. The man she loved had died the day he chose Tiffany. This man in front of her was just a stranger who owed her 10 years of her life. "Share?" Sarah repeated, her voice calm. "Like you shared our marriage vows?" "That's different," David argued. "This is business." "No, David," Sarah said. "This is justice." She turned to Miller. "Miller, what is the protocol for uninvited guests who cause a disturbance?" Miller smiled, a genuine, wide grin. "We ask them to leave, Mum. If they refuse, we escort them. If they resist, we call the Greenwich Police Department for criminal trespass." "Excellent," Sarah said. She looked at her watch. "It is 9:15. I want them off my property by 9:30. "You can't be serious," Tiffany shrieked. "My bag is in the bridal suite. My makeup is there. I have stuff here." "You have 15 minutes to collect your personal effects," Sarah said. "I suggest you hurry. The East Wing is a long walk." "I'm not leaving." Tiffany stomped her foot. "David, tell her. We are not leaving." David looked at his father. "Dad, stop her. This is humiliating." Arthur closed his eyes. "I'm just a guest here, David. You'll have to take it up with the landlady." "Fine," David spat. "Fine, we'll leave. But don't think this is over. I'll sue. I'll contest the deed. I'll drag you through court for years, Sarah. You won't see a dime of alimony." Sterling, the lawyer, cleared his throat again. "Ah, Mr. Harrington, I'm glad you brought up the finances." David froze. "What now?" Sterling pulled another document from his briefcase. "Regarding the lawsuit you intend to file, you will need a retainer for a lawyer. And regarding your daily expenses—" "I have my own money," David shouted. "I have my salary from the company." "Actually," Sterling corrected him, "you had a salary. As of this morning's board meeting, which your father attended via video conference, you have been voted out as CEO due to conduct detrimental to the firm." David reeled back as if he'd been punched. "What?" "And," Sterling continued relentlessly, "the company credit cards have been frozen. The lease on the downtown penthouse? It was in the company name. That has been terminated effective tomorrow. The G-Wagon outside? Company lease. Miller has already collected the spare keys." The silence that followed was absolute. David Harrington was not just homeless, he was jobless and broke. Tiffany slowly turned her head to look at David. Her eyes were wide, processing the information. The gears in her head were turning, visibly. David. Rich heir, amateur husband material. David. Broke, jobless, homeless. Liability. "David," Tiffany said, her voice trembling. "Is that true? You don't own the penthouse?" "Tiff, it's just a setback," David stammered, reaching for her hand. "I'll fix it. I have savings. We can—" "You told me you owned the building," Tiffany screamed. She slapped his hand away. "You told me you were worth $50 million. I am. On paper, eventually." "I don't date eventually," Tiffany yelled. She looked around the room, realizing her social climbing ladder had just collapsed. She looked at Sarah, then at Arthur, and finally at David with pure disgust. "I am not going to be homeless with you, David," she hissed. "I'm 24. I have options." She turned on her heel and started walking toward the door. "Tiffany," David called out. Where are you going? We have to pack." "I'm getting an Uber," she shouted back, not even breaking stride. "Send my stuff to my mum's house, and don't call me until you have a black card that actually works." The guests watched in awe as the love of his life walked out on him, exactly 3 minutes after he lost his money. David stood alone in the center of the room. He looked stripped down, pathetic. He looked at Sarah. "Sarah," he whispered. "She just left me." "I noticed," Sarah said coolly. "It seems her love was as deep as that puddle of wine." "I have nowhere to go," David said. He looked at his father. "Dad?" Arthur didn't open his eyes. David looked back at Sarah. "Sarah, please. It's raining. You can't just kick me out. We were married for 10 years. Doesn't that mean anything?" Sarah stepped closer to him. She looked him in the eye. "It meant everything to me, David. That's why I stayed when your business failed. That's why I nursed your father. That's why I put up with your family. But you threw it away for a shiny object, and now that the object is gone, you want the safety net back." She shook her head. "The net is gone, David. You cut the strings." She gestured to Miller. "Miller," Sarah said. "Please escort Mr. Harrington to the gate. He can wait for his Uber there, outside." "With pleasure, Ms. Jenkins," Miller said. He placed a heavy hand on David's shoulder. "Let's go, sir. Don't make me drag you." David looked around the room, begging for someone to intervene. But the guests, his friends, his business partners, all looked away. They were already aligning themselves with the new power structure. They were sipping their drinks, watching the show. David hung his head. He let Miller lead him out of the ballroom, past the head table he had tried to rule, past the painting of him and Tiffany that now looked like a joke, and out into the cold, driving rain. When the doors closed behind him, the room remained quiet for a heartbeat. Then Arthur Harrington clapped his hands once. "Well," Arthur announced, "now that the rubbish has been taken out, Sarah, my dear." "Yes, Arthur." "I believe there is a cake to be cut. And since it's your house, I believe you should do the honors." Sarah smiled. It was a real smile this time. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of release. She walked over to the massive birthday cake. She picked up the silver knife. She looked at the crowd. "Everyone," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for coming. Please eat, drink, but be careful with the wine. The carpet is silk." Laughter rippled through the room. The tension broke. The band started playing a lively jazz number. Sarah cut the cake. The first slice wasn't for her. She put it on a plate and handed it to Arthur. "Happy birthday, Dad," she whispered. Arthur took the plate. "Welcome home, daughter." 6 months later. The spring rain in Greenwich didn't feel cold. It felt like a baptism. It washed away the salt from the roads and fed the hydrangeas that lined the driveway of the Harrington estate. Inside, the mansion was whole again. The Blair Harrington wing that Tiffany had threatened to build never happened. Instead, Sarah had hired a restoration team to strip away the tacky, modern fixtures David had installed. The estate no longer looked like a sterile hotel lobby. It looked like a home. Miller, who Sarah had promoted to estate manager, walked into the library, where Sarah was arranging white peonies. He wasn't just wearing a security uniform anymore. He wore a tailored suit. "The guests are arriving, Miss Sarah," Miller smiled, "and Arthur is in top form. He's been telling the new gardener exactly how to prune the roses since dawn." Tonight was the annual Harrington Charity Gala. But unlike the vanity projects of the past, this was for the Children's Hospital. Arthur sat by the fireplace, looking healthier than he had in years. The stress of watching his legacy crumble was gone, replaced by the joy of watching Sarah rebuild it. "You look dashing, Arthur," Sarah said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "And you look like the queen of the castle," Arthur beamed. "Eleanor would be proud. You saved us, Sarah." The fall of the prince. While Sarah prepared to greet senators and doctors, David Harrington was sitting in a rusted 2015 Ford Focus outside the estate gates. The last 6 months had been a brutal lesson in gravity. After being blacklisted from the finance world, David was working a low-wage sales job, cold-calling trucking companies. He was broke, exhausted, and alone. Tiffany had vanished the moment the credit cards were frozen. She hadn't called once. A week ago, David saw a photo of her on Instagram, partying on a yacht in Miami, with a man wearing a Rolex worth more than David's new annual salary. Desperate and humbled, David saw the lights of the gala. He slipped through the open gates behind a catering truck and walked up the driveway in the rain. The final door miller intercepted him at the main entrance. "I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the list." "Sarah!" David called out, seeing her cross the foyer. Sarah stopped. She walked over, her silk gown swishing softly. She looked at David, his suit ill-fitting, his hair wet, his eyes filled with panic. "David," she said, her voice calm. "What are you doing here?" "I made a mistake," David stammered, stepping closer. "Tiffany was a virus. I see that now. I miss you. I miss us. I'm working hard. I'm changing. Please let me come home. I'll stay in the guest room. Just don't leave me out here." Sarah looked at him. She felt a twinge of pity, but she realized that pity is not love. "David," she said softly, "do you remember the gate code?" He blinked, confused. 1984, my birth year." "No," Sarah said. "That was the old code, the one you changed to lock me out. I don't know the new one." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "You don't have the code, David. Not to the gate, not to this house, and not to my life." "Sarah, please, I have nothing." "You have your consequences," she said. "And frankly, that's more than you left me with." She nodded to Miller. "Close the door." "Sarah," David shouted. But the heavy oak doors swung shut with a definitive thud, silencing him and sealing out the rain. Sarah stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. She didn't feel sad. She felt light. "Who was that?" Arthur called out from the fireplace. Sarah turned back to the warmth, the music, and the home she had earned. "Just a delivery to the wrong address," she smiled. Wow, just wow. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just closed the door. That is the ultimate power move. David thought Sarah would always be there, like a piece of furniture he could put in storage while he played around. He forgot that even the sturdiest foundation will crack if you keep taking a sledgehammer to it. And Arthur? He played the long game perfectly. So, here is my question for you guys today. If you were Sarah, would you have opened the door for David at the end? Would you have given him a second chance, now that he was broke and humbled? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of karma served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next story. I'm your channel name. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.